Gentlemen, how nice you could all join me. Let's hope we can get a few more things out of you that we didn't get from our stars earlier this afternoon. Start with Bill Price. When did you start planning this event, which happened in November? How early did you actually start work on it?
Difficult to remember exactly when we started. Excuse me. Because the event was due to start in December, if I remember correctly, wasn't it? And so we were well underway with the preparation of the cars, sort of probably by May time, I should think, having done quite a bit of testing at Bagshot. So, and it was during the summer that Peter Browning arranged for Paul Easter, Henry Liddon and Tony Nash to go on the first reconnaissance. So we prepared an 1800 to roughly the spec that we expected the cars to be. The main difference to look at the cars, to look at the recce car had a rather large box on the roof with the idea of carrying spare parts and that sort of thing. And so they set off to do a reconnaissance of the route from London to Bombay. And unfortunately, in the, I think it was in Iran, a sharp object, probably a pebble of some sort, got between one of the rear displacer units and the diaphragm steel casing and punctured it. And once that happens, of course, the suspension collapses on that side of the car. So that was okay. Paul East, a great mechanic. They had a hydroelastic pump built into the car, attached to the rear bulkhead for such an eventuality. So Paul gets the spare displacer out of the toolkit and, oh dear, wrong one. What we had decided to do to compensate for a three-man crew and also the extra fuel tank capacity, thereby the extra weight, was to fit the same size of hydroelastic unit to the rear suspension as was normally fitted to the front, because the normal configuration was in that manner. So we had fitted larger hydroelastic units to the rear, which meant the carrier that took it had to be modified. And unfortunately, it was probably a bit of a cock-up in the stores, but when they did the spares kit, they were not aware that the larger displacer unit would have been the one to carry. The idea was, of course, that spare parts-wise during the event, cars would carry one displacer unit and it would fit front or rear.
So a difficult start in many ways, but you also had a rather difficult problem. It wasn't your problem, but the difficult problem was that before this event happened, Lord Stokes had decided, if you like, to run down the rally programme, and quite a few of the drivers were coming to the end of their contracts, weren't they?
Yes, that's correct. And Peter had quite a problem convincing Lord Stokes to provide the budget to do the event. And it was a number of things, and I looked this up the other day. One of the things that he said, with tongue-in-cheek, was that any prize money could go towards the budget. So the other thing was that the recce was already taking place, so there was quite an expense already being built up there. And the other thing he did, and I'm sure Paddy and Alec will remember this, it was decided to cut the crew's day money. I'm talking about the works crew's day money, which would normally be £12 a day. It was cut to £5 a day.
That's like letting blood, isn't it, Bill?
And this was a bit of a lever to try and convince Lord Stokes to let the thing go ahead. Anyway, eventually he signed it off, yeah.
Okay, so that's one side of things. Now, the other is that I'm delighted to say that I'm now so old, I know it shows, I'm so old that I remember Marcus Chambers when he was at his height at BMC in the early 1960s. I also knew him pretty well in Coventry when he was running the Roots Chrysler competition department. Marcus, of course, had a wonderful end to his motorsport career by managing the winning car of Andrew Cowan in this event. I didn't know at the time, and I'm delighted to know now for the first time, his progeny, if you like, his son, who not only was a sort of avid teenager at the time, but he grew up knowing everything about his father. He's also, he tells me today, he's just been appointed the CEO, the newly appointed CEO of the RAC MSA. So I'm going to bow and curtsy and also introduce to you Marcus Chambers' son, Hugh Chambers.
Thank you very much.
First of all, Hugh, did I get the intro right?
You most certainly did, yes.
How much do you remember about the London-Sydney? I mean, you couldn't have been, I know I'm old, you couldn't have been very old when that event happened.
No, I definitely feel like I'm the odd one out here in as much as all these wonderful names from the past were competing or managing teams, and I was merely a schoolboy. I was 11 years old at the time, and I became something of a celebrity in my own right, because at school, the Daily Express were the sponsors of the event, and of course every day it was there, it was in the newspapers, and having newly arrived as a boarder at this school, suddenly to be able to reveal that my father was running one of these teams was a fascinating sort of sudden spotlight for me, because rallying, of course, was not front page news, except when Paddy was winning, and so it was really thrusting it into the forefront of the national conscience. And for me, I mean, I had grown up with Rosemary driving for my father in Imps and Tigers, and my godfather was John Gott, and you know, I've been.
God, he's dropping names, isn't he? All over.
No, but it was extraordinary, you know. And I came across a picture the other day of me sitting in a caravan with Vic Elford with a cigarette in between races, you know, sort of, and it was sort of the backdrop of my life. And then suddenly this extraordinary event came along, and it became a national obsession.
Did Dad bring his work home and kick the cat and things like that? Tear the curtains down? I mean, I knew him quite well, but I never thought of him as a very emotional man.
Well, I think he was often referred to as a poor man's Nurbar. He was a large man, and Bill's nodding there. I think he had I
think the tailor's profession would call it substantially built.
Yes, indeed. And he, I think allegedly, he had a fairly strong and passionate temper at times, which I think he took it upon himself to manage the management, so whether it was Lord Roots or Lord Stokes, and I think he always protected the team of people that he had in the workshop, and I think that's something he took great pride in. But then when he came home, that was all left behind. What he did bring home was an extraordinary collection of cars. You know, we'd sort of get picked up from school in a full-blown Group 5 rally car, which always went down rather well.
Good for the reputation at school, I guess.
Indeed.
So if I can now go on to David Harrison on the far side, I have to say that David and I have probably met once, somewhere on a rally about 50 years ago. Hello, nice to see you again. David, you competed in the London-Sydney Marathon in a works-prepared, sorry guys, Lotus Cortina, but that couldn't have happened overnight. So where did that programme come from?
Well, that is also not quite right.
Go on, probably right. Everyone else does.
As most of these stories, a group of us in the army, in particular, decided when the RAC rally was cancelled the year before,
67, yeah,
that there should be a military presence of some sort in this putative London to Sydney marathon, and I tied myself in with a guy in 4th Tank Regiment who thought he had got the promise of some sponsorship and sort of got an agreement from Ford that they would be prepared to allow let the army have a car. And the letter actually, I think, says something like, the army brackets whoever that might be. Anyway, this chap had to drop out because he was posted somewhere else. And so I picked up the reins for it. Oh, the sponsor dropped out, of course. And we went down to Boreham to the competition department to meet Henry Taylor, who was the competition manager. And we went out for lunch. We had a good lunch, which he paid for, or Ford paid for. And he said, yes, all right, you can have a car. You can have the car we built for Roger Clark for the RAC. But we can't do anything to it. We'll give you all the bits, but you've got to put it together.
The reason I'm nodding is that I know that that car for the RAC Rally was very, very, very non-standard. So there was a lot of work facing it, wasn't there?
Well, yes, in fact, we took it almost back to standard. But it was an exciting car to drive. It was unbelievably low geared. And I remember driving up the Fossway and going past a policeman on his motorbike. No, he wasn't on my motorbike, he was on his push bike. And
It was a fast car.
I was showing about 7,000 revs in top gear, and that was only about 85. But it was a really, really quick car. And anyway, we had to take all the stuff out of it, take all that back to Boreham, and just like Christmas, go and pick up a new engine, a new gearbox, a new back axle, all the bits that were being built to the specification of the marathon cars.
So let me interrupt first of all and say, did you go 2 up or 3 up? I don't remember. 2 up. And since I like to know these things, what was your rank, old chap, and what was your co-driver's rank?
I was a captain.
You were a captain?
And my colleague was a lieutenant.
So he did exactly as he was told, did he?
Sorry?
He did exactly as he was told?
No, very rarely. And Martin was I knew he was a good bloke in a tight corner, because he got an MC in Aden when the troubles were there, for basically getting himself out of trouble from a place where he shouldn't have been.
Had you been in motorsport before, the two of you?
Yes, I had. I started rallying in Germany in my own car, and in fact, a flag and army vehicle of some sort. And then up in Scotland when I was up there, and I'd done the RAC in a 3-litre Rover, an ex-Rover Works car. And so, that was mine. Martin had done nothing. He did a couple of local rallies, and somehow he got an international license. I'm not quite sure how, but when we got to Warwick Farm, he turned to me and said, "You know, David, that's the first rally I've finished."
Okay, Bill, back to you with an easier question, if you can remember after all those years. Big event, long event, big operation. Can you remember in terms of sort of how many vehicles and how many people did you have to juggle? Because you were effectively the man who had to do most things for Peter, didn't you? And did you hire an aeroplane at any stage, and so on?
To be fair, Peter did most of the service scheduling, to be quite honest. We had a number of vehicles covering the European leg, certainly down as far as Yugoslavia, but we had to fly personnel to other points along the Asian route. In Australia, because we had an Australian crew in one of our cars built at Abingdon, we had great assistance from British Leyland Australia, and right the way along the route at all the service points, control points where there was a chance to see the cars, fix the cars. There were a lot of mechanics, in addition to the odd one or two of ours who might have been flown to that point. So from Turkey onwards, I think Tehran was the next point where there was at least one or two mechanics, and there were certainly two at the Turkish-Iranian border. They'd flown to Tehran and taken a hire car and came out to the border, saw the cars through there, and we had some people at Kabul, and I think from then on there was nothing on the road. But
so you were, in a way, I won't say lucky, but you had obviously, and some of the mechanics are at the back. Give us a wave, you guys. Oh, there you are. Some of the mechanics are still there at the back. They haven't moved for 50 years. They had produced a great team of cars, so the cars effectively were quite reliable, weren't they? Yeah. Until people started leaning on mountains with them.
Well, what I failed to mention was that it was decided to run a sweeper car. And I'm not sure if any of the other manufacturers did. If they did, I don't know. And I was destined with incredibly coincidentally, Tommy Eales and Bob Whittington were sitting up in the audience.
One day I'll do a chat show with them, and that's a hint, John Watson. Go on.
So we, it was scheduled to send the sweeper car for a couple of reasons, really. Well, 3 reasons maybe. Most of the countries we were going through had serious customs problems, and it was going to be quite expensive to leave a car in the country if you had a car with a terminal breakdown. So I think the idea was to at least get the car, if it was broken down, the sweeper car could get it to somewhere safe.
Yeah.
We, first of all, we used Vandenpla 4 litre R's, can you believe it? BMC's modified Westminster.
If I can interrupt you at a point, I once drove a Vandenpla Princess as a press man on the RAC rally, arrived at a BMC service point when they didn't have any, and when I left I found a notice on my screen that could only been written by Stuart Turner, and he said, "Snob." So yes, but they were good cars.
Well, the Vandenpla 4 litre all aluminium Rolls-Royce engine, good solid car. We'd used it for a couple of years already, and it was decided to run a sweeper car, as they say. And if my memory serves me correctly, one of the reasons was that I think in the regulations, the organisers allowed an extra 2 hours lateness at Istanbul, I think it was, and then further on down the route, 12 hours lateness. So that meant that, you know, your car could be broken down for quite a long time and get fixed and still be in the running. And of course, the other reason for a sweeper car was to hopefully find a broken down car and hopefully fix it.
Get it going again.
So went out to Turkey with two of the cars. My car with Bob were destined to go on sweeping from that point. The other car would see the cars through the CVAS start of the section there. The section there, for whatever reason, I've never found out why the organisers decided to have a choice of a northern route and a southern route, and strangely the southern route was slightly shorter. Well, you know, there was going to be no question where the works cars were going to go. They were going to take the shortest route. It just seemed almost unreal. But I think with hindsight, because the southern route was so muddy and wet and soft, I think they were afraid, and there were new roadworks on it. It was all dirt anyway, it was an all dirt gravel road. So when we got to Sivas, Bob and I had the job of driving the southern route and the northern route in our Vandenpla with the road book and making notes of any serious hazards. And the southern route we'd started first, and it was very muddy. We did about 140 k's, I should think, came through a village. There was a bridge which was just literally 2 planks over a raging torrent. There'd been a lot of rain. Bob's got a bit of cine film of me walking through a puddle about as long as this stage to test the depth. And then we got over a bridge with about a 6-inch drop off the edge, started going up a hill, and we got stuck. Partly ground clearance, and perhaps I should have driven it a bit harder at the bottom, but it was very muddy. So out comes the shovel, and we start digging. We thought, bugger it, you know, we're only about 9 kilometres to where we would join up to the northern route.
Rallying's glamorous, isn't it?
We were so close. So, just briefly, we were digging. 2 chaps came walking up the road, no one to be seen anywhere. And they indicated with sign language, would you like a tow? So they disappeared. One came back with chains over his shoulder. And then we heard an engine. And out of the mist, a red Ferguson tractor. So we thought, we're saved, you know, hook on the front, off we go. Probably went as far as twice the length of this stage, and the tractor came to a standstill with us still attached to it, but the tractor wheels were still going round, and so the guys on the tractor pointed over the fields and said, we go that way, sort of indication. So I said to Bob, are we going to risk it? Because, bandits, what's going to happen? We might get stranded there. If the tractor gives up and leaves us there, we aren't going to go anywhere. May not get home. So we took a chance. So hooked us on, towed us over the fields, through a village, came to a river. And it was a raging torrent, and there was a ford. You could see a ford going through the river. The tractor stopped and indicated it'd like a bit more money. Well, I think we'd probably to go through the river. I think we paid them the equivalent of a couple of quid in US dollars or something. So we gave him another couple of quid. And I said to Bob, we better get our sleeping bags out of the rear footwell because I'm not sure quite how deep this water is. So anyway, we sailed through, and we were saved and went back to Seabass. And then...
and all the time, Bill Price thought he had an office job.
and then the next day, we shot off to Erzincan, which is the end of the section,
Right.
where we would see the cars through, leaving the other service car with Dunlop, who had tyres there, to see the cars through. And from that point on, we swept the route, yeah.
So, Hugh, as you say, you were a schoolboy when this event took place. Did your father ever bring his chief mechanic, Des O'Dell, home, and were there lots of arguments and wavings of arms and drawings made and things? Or were you too young really to care?
Well, there was a lot of sort of backdrop of, I remember him coming back with stories of going to Bagshot, which is where all the recce work was done. So it was with the army down at Bagshot, and they felt that was going to give them a bit of an advantage. I did see pictures upstairs, which I assume is the 1800s, on a similar sort of military range. So I guess everybody had a sort of a similar idea. But there was definitely a lot of sort of buzz in the household of the preparation for this. And he actually flew out to Tehran and I think out to Afghanistan prior to the event, also doing recce's as well.
And I know, because I was around at the time, that although the team won the event and Father was team manager, within weeks he was suddenly not there anymore. That must have been a real shock. Not in competitions anymore, I mean.
Yes, no, it was absolutely. I think that was the case. What happened was that Chrysler bought Roots immediately in that period. I think it was almost, they started the event as a Roots team and they entered it as a Chrysler team. And it was Chrysler Australia that sort of greeted them. And it was the American PR machine that then took over, but had very little understanding or any understanding of rallying. And you're absolutely right, it was my father's last event. He then went on to run the proving ground at Bruntingthorpe before he retired.
Mm-hmm. David, going to David Harrison now. David, do I presume you did no recceing? You obviously didn't have the time and the budget to go recceing.
No, we had the Castrol pace notes, which were excellent.
Sorry, explain to the people there how that happened.
Well, it's just I don't know how it happened, but we were given a book saying London to Tehran or something, or Istanbul, I think, and it told us the route to go, because the thing that was different really about this event was that there were very few time controls. There was sort of one a day. And how you got from one to the next was very much up to you. And you could choose your route, but very often there was only one effective route. So we stuck to the book. We had the book. And it was very good. It was quite interesting in some places in Australia where there was something like, 142.3 miles cross-track straight on. And that meant, you could go 140 miles and you could be on the wrong road.
And literally the road across the Nullarbor Plain really was straight, wasn't it?
Yes. But
not necessarily smooth, but straight.
There was only one road. And we had maps because we were in the military. And when we got to the Australian maps, were very interesting because they were graded in before satellite mapping and all that sort of stuff. They were graded A, B, and C. And the only bit that was guaranteed was A. That was 100%. And that was the shoreline. B went about 20 miles inland. And C was, you know, well, the sun's up there, so that's south, and you know you're on your own. But we didn't have maps per se. We stuck to the book, and you know, leave as long as the sun comes up behind you in the morning, and you know you're all right. You know, because that's the way you're going.
Bill, we are here to celebrate the 50th anniversary event and the Gene Denton MGB. Did you even see that car or be asked questions about it before it happened, or did they keep it to themselves?
I certainly was not aware of the car, and I'm not sure if Special Tuning had any dealings with it. They may well have unknowingly supplied spare parts.
So very definitely a private entry in every way.
Yes, we certainly didn't, in the competitions department, we certainly didn't know anything about that entry, no.
Hugh, I'm going to let you boast for a little, because everyone said, yeah, okay, schoolboy, son of a famous father and things, and what's he doing now? But you've been very much involved in motorsport and high performance cars for the last 10 or 15 years, haven't you? Do tell, just for a moment. I shall take my commission afterwards.
Thank you. I just wanted to also say that there's been a lot of mention of Gene Denton's MG, but of course there was another MG, the John Sprinzel, fiddler MG Midget.
Yeah.
And I remember that, with John was a good family friend, and up at Everton where he had his little cottage, that the passenger seat in it was done in a wonderful sort of psychedelic print, and it was sort of laid out as a long bed. And I think everybody thought he was absolutely bonkers going all the way to, I mean, it's fairly mad doing it in an MGB, but an MG Midget. And John, for those who know him, I mean, he's 6'5", and quite how they managed to prise themselves into this car. And there's a very famous picture of the Midget, I'm sure you've all seen, in the Outback, with the front left wheel off. And of course, the reason for that was that they'd broken the stub axle. And I'm sure many of you have heard the story, but if you haven't, they did manage to find an MG Midget out in the middle of nowhere in Australia, and it was 6 hours drive away. So off they went, and they went off and picked up this stub axle, got it back to the car, and it was the left-hand one. And unfortunately, at that point, they were out of time. So John, unfortunately, they didn't manage to complete it. But no, as you've gathered, I grew up in a motor racing family. The first part of my career I spent working for big ad agencies, but I then met a man called David Richards, and David and I, a guy called Ian.
Knowing smiles from both the other people there, as you said that.
Well,
Go on.
indeed. I mean, David is a colossus in the industry, and I was very fortunate to meet him in '94 when ProDrive was really beginning to take off. It was about 100 people at that time. By the time I left, we were over 1,200 people, and there were 4 of us. David Lapworth was the 4th member, and I joined just at the purple patch when we'd got the long-term contract with Subaru. I managed all the business side and the commercial side and the marketing, and one thing led to another. And ProDrive had been very successful already in touring cars, Rothmans with Porsches and the 6R4s, but really it was Subaru that was, I think, the extraordinary period, and we had 6 world championships, including manufacturers, in the space of 6-7 years, with Colin, with Richard, and with Petter, taking the drivers' titles. And then I personally got involved in running the sales division, which included all of the customer Subarus, and then working with Freddie Dorr, we developed the Ferrari 550s, and I ran that at Le Mans, ran the US rally team for Subaru, and we had all the touring car programs with Honda, with Alfa Romeo, and then ultimately with Ford, which I think was sort of the pinnacle of the super touring era. And then because of our relationship through Subaru with BAT, British American Tobacco, they had decided they were going to go into Formula One. They were going to take on Philip Morris. And I think probably most people know that they decided to set up a team from scratch with Craig Pollock and Jacques Villeneuve and Adrian Reynard. We'd actually pitched for that business, and we had a deal on the table, and we were going to buy the Benetton team, and everything had been agreed with the Benetton family, and we were going to do it as a joint venture with BAT. And they decided in their ultimate wisdom to do a brownfield site in Brackley and to start the team from scratch. And you'll also remember that 3 years in, they'd scored 8 points, and it was an abject failure. David in that period when we were looking at buying the Benetton team had actually been taken in. They'd got rid of Flavio for a year and put David in, which I think was more about a way of sort of telling off David than telling off Flavio. And David unfortunately inherited a couple of drivers who weren't at the top of the form at that time, Alex Wirtz and Fisichella. So left after a year, but what he had learned was being team principal in the Formula One team. BAT came to us at the end of 2001 and asked David to take over the team. And David, myself and Nick Fry then went to Brackley and we took over the BAR Honda Formula One team. And from 2001 to 2004, we went from 8 points in the championship to, in 2004, second in the World Championship, only to Ferrari. And we had 11 podiums that year. And as a consequence, we sold the team to Honda on behalf of BAT, who had to get out of tobacco. And I think you know the rest of the history with Honda and then Braun and now Mercedes. So a lot of my former colleagues in Brackley. That was a time when I felt it was appropriate for me to leave motorsport. I then went to work for the British Olympic Association, ran the whole Team GB program through the London Games, subsequently worked for Team Sky with Stowe Brailsford, and my most recent role has been as the Chief Commercial Officer for World Sailing, which is the International Federation for Sailing worldwide. And then, as you kindly illustrated, I've been appointed as the Chief Executive of the MSA starting at the beginning of November, reunited with my former partner David Richards, who's the chairman.
Damn it, we don't have time to go into any more detail on that, Hugh, but I've just learnt an awful lot. David, I have to ask you, you obviously stayed in the military for some time.
No.
After you managed to...
No. No, I left in 1971.
Okay, well, so you could, another 3 years then.
Yes.
But, and about 3
Close.
promotions. So you were a colonel, were you?
No.
Oh,
Still a
sorry.
captain.
Now, back to the question, if
Yes.
you don't mind. When you finished the London-Sydney Marathon, you finished, although you didn't win, of course. Did that give you any ambitions to go further and further if you could raise the money?
The answer is I would have liked to, but I wanted to stay married. And my wife said, you know, when I announced that I was doing the London-Sydney, that she said, well, that's going to be a trip of a lifetime. And then I did it twice more, so I'm either working on a cat's lives or something, but we are still married after 55 years.
Is she here?
So, yeah, I must just cap your John Sprinsel bit.
Yep.
John Sprinsel was not going to be allowed out of the trotting track onto Australian roads because he had got a damaged rear light. And he was rushing round asking, has anybody got any red plastic? Anything. Anyway, Martin somehow from somewhere produced a bit of red plastic and a bit of sellotape and whatever, and we put it together to satisfy the local authorities or whoever it was that were complaining about it. So off he went, only to break a stub axle. But,
now, what I
nice
want to
man.
do, thank you for that. What I want to do now, I hope, looking at John Watson, is what's going on down there? I like that. That's a bit of dumb play. If John Watson's got a microphone that works, what I do hope is that there'll be people out there in the audience who want to ask questions, either of these 3 guys or of my earlier 3 famous people. Please, please, please. This is where I get embarrassed if it goes quiet. But John, would you like to take a microphone with you and go and farm the audience for me? Ladies and gentlemen, questions, please. There must be some. Hand in the air, and let's hear what you have to say. See what I mean about being embarrassed?
There's one here. Jump in feet first. It's a bit loud. A bit of a simple question, really. We're talking about 50 years ago, and it's so interesting. Have any of the people managed to keep hold of any of the competition cars that they've driven for all these years? You know, or have they long gone? Paddy or Rosemary or anybody?
Tell us about the land crab at Gaydon.
Paddy, go ahead.
Yeah, well, the land, I don't know about the land crab at Gaydon, but I do know that Alec built the car that we won the Pirelli Marathon with, and I've still got that 6 CMO, is it? Yeah.
Saw you there at Radley College.
And that car is winning rallies, not in my hands, and somebody much more capable nowadays in the north of England. So that's great. And I've got a replica of the Monte car because the 33 JB is in Gaydon rotting. I'll probably get somebody throwing something at me for that, and a guy in Northern Ireland, McConnell, the coxswain of the lifeboat in Donnelly, built a replica, which is terrific, and we had it over in Northern Ireland last weekend with Walter Roll and I, and we raised a lot of money for charity in Northern Ireland.
Thank you.
Rosemary's got a very nice car, if I remember rightly. It was out the other day in front of Dublin. Tell us what
Well, I have
Dublin.
one of my work simps that I've had for a long while. It was found in a cow shed, and we didn't even know whether it was an actual work simp, but it turned out EDU 710C, and it was completely redone by Clark Dawson, who's up nearly at the border area between England and Scotland, and he did a wonderful job. That's absolutely perfect. But I was going down to do a run around with it in Mondello, which is our local race circuit, our only race circuit, and the man who was bringing it down for me went into a bend a little bit too fast, so it now has a bent front wing, door, back end. So he said, "Oh, I'm sorry." So he's been looking after it. I didn't say a word. I thought I really was very restrained, but no, he just lost it, because people always thought they were little tin boxes anyway. So, but with the weight in the back, they're a bit inclined to be skittery. But unfortunately for old John, it was skittery, and he felt terrible about it. I didn't say a word. I only bring it out in demonstration runs and that sort of thing, but it's the genuine one, so.
And what happened last week? Did you take an to Dublin town?
No, I had a Sunbeam Tiger, 4.7 litre Sunbeam Tiger, and it's brilliant. I was on the thing Paddy was on, and we went over some of the absolute wonderful stages we used to do on the Circuit of Ireland, and we were told, now this is not a race, it's not a rally, we're just going very sedately around the place. And then I got in behind Derek Boyd and Cathal Curley. One was in a Porsche and one was in a Mustang. And I think we scattered every hen and cow and sheep and everything around the north of Ireland. But it was really brilliant. It was a fantastic run. But that was an ex-works Tiger as well. There are loads of ex-works cars around, believe it or not. But they're getting more and more and more and more expensive.
What I was hoping that Rosemary would have said, that she's recently been made.
Speak into the mic, please.
Am I right in saying you've recently given the freedom of Dublin? This last week?
Now, you must remember that Dublin is a very small place, so to get the freedom of anywhere is quite good. It's usually all the various pubs I go into, they say, "Here she comes again, go and give her a free drink," which is grand. No, I didn't get the freedom of Dublin, unfortunately. I was invited to the Mansion House, which is our main, and the Lord Mayor, and so on, and I was given a scroll thing to say that they were, something about what I'd achieved and one thing and another. Very nice. But the funny part was I had never met this new Lord Mayor until last week. So I went in and I said, "Excuse me, what do I call you?" And he said, "Niall." I said, "But you're the Lord Mayor. I can't say, 'Hi, Niall, how are you? Thanks for having me tonight.'" But no, he just said, "No, my name is Niall. Okay, I suppose you better, if you want to call me Lord Mayor." But it was a fantastic do, and loads of people sitting in the front row were meant to be here, but of course, or there I should say. No, and I'm having a book launch on the 4th of October.
October?
That's next
week.
Yeah. Anyway, so, and I've asked some of the front row here to come over, but no, they're too busy. One's going shooting, and I don't know what the other one's doing, but anyway, never mind. That's all. Sorry, goodbye.
Any more, please? Otherwise, I have other plans for the next few minutes. Yeah, one there going quite a long way up, John. Thank you very much for that. It keeps us busy here listening.
I hate a pregnant silence. One thing that intrigues me is the situation concerning the cars. Obviously, bits fell off them. Well, I say obviously, the 1800 didn't have a great reputation for endurance, even in the normal civilian hands. Gear changes went wrong, clutches wore out, and stuff like that. So, how much actual maintenance was done on the car? What did you get through the whole 11,000 miles on the one clutch? And secondly, there is a device in the back for pumping up the hydroelastic suspension. How did that actually work? Did the commander of the car, i.e. Paddy Hopkirk, scream at the top voice, "Pump up, we're coming to some rough road," and then let it down, we're onto some smooth road? I mean, how did it actually work?
Let's hope Bill Price can give us the 2-minute lecture rather than the 30-minute lecture, Bill.
Well, in the BMC agency, there'd be a box about the size of that box there, which was a pump and a vacuum pump, a pressure pump and a vacuum pump, and a container of liquid. So, just going back to the question, the pump version, the pump part of that device was bolted to the rear bulkhead in the car, and with a container of fluid. So that the idea was that if the suspension settled or developed a leak, and it was a leak which could be cured, then the crew would have the opportunity of pumping it back up to level up the suspension so it was equal.
I wondered what that was for. I have trouble with him wherever I talk to him.
You hang your living on it.
There's a hand in the air there which I'll ask to wait for just a minute. David, how many spares, how much stuff did you carry in your privately entered car when you started?
Well, it's surprising. Amongst my bits of paper, I have still got the list of spare parts that we carried. And it's very, very few. This was for the carnet, and
Sure.
as you were saying about going in and out of borders. Very, very little. It's real sort of stoppers, a wheel bearing. We didn't carry track control arms. We didn't carry half shafts. We didn't carry any of those things. The thinking was to keep the car as light as possible. That way you were less likely to damage it. And so that was the thinking. We didn't have any suspension spares worth a light. So it was string and sealing wax, basically, and bits of wire. And we only saw the mechanics, I think, in Milan, Istanbul, Tehran was a major service. Kabul, there was quite a lot. Didn't see anything on the Sivas Erzincan bit. And then nothing really till Bombay. So Ford's servicing was very light. And if something went wrong, you had to fix it. But we didn't have anything go wrong.
Talking about servicing being very light, Bill and I can bore you for a whole evening about London, Mexico 2 years later, where Bill took, was it 44 flights in 6 weeks to get you from through all the service points? I think you told me.
Well, I don't normally carry, I've never kept a diary, but on the London-Sydney I had a little notebook, and each day I wrote down the main things that happened, which allowed me to do a diary. Did the same thing on London to Mexico, and I discovered that I had taken 22 flights, I think, in 11 different types of aircraft.
And as he said to me once, I don't even like aeroplanes.
Well, first of all, I did the European leg, most of the European leg in a Cessna with Robin Vokins, who was our mechanic, and Ron Elkins from Special Tuning, hopping up ahead of the rally cars. Then we had the Bristol Britannia, which carried our spares, wheels and tyres, out to South America from Lisbon. And then nearly all of our movements around South America were by aircraft, by commercial flights. We did hire light aircraft for a couple of jobs. I did a salvation job with Andrew Cowan's passport. I flew from Montevideo to the Brazilian, Uruguayan border with his passport, which he'd left behind in Rio. But yes, so quite a variation of aircraft, yes. But I'd just like to pick up the point made by the gentleman about the 1800 reliability. Go on. I mean, in my experience, the normal road car was reasonably reliable, but the 1800 was, in my opinion, very reliable. We'd had a fair amount of experience on events like the Acropolis Rally. We'd won the Danube Rally, which was a rough road rally, probably won it because of the hydroelastic suspension, making the car faster than the Renault Gordinis, which were the main opposition from the works there, and Monte Carlo Rally as well. So we'd had quite a bit of experience with it, and with the testing at Bagshot, we found out where the weak parts were. And during the London-Sydney, the only failure that I can recall was that in Iran, the car driven by Tony Fall, totally out of the blue, a top suspension arm fractured. And I put it down to mass-produced parts, really, because we'd never had a failure of that nature during any other events or during Bagshot testing. They managed to get it welded in the desert and carried on to the finish. The other damage to the cars during the event were inflicted by the crews.
Self-inflicted, yes.
Around Alton and went off the road in Iran, bent the suspension, and Paul Easter said, well, we've got a turf or winch in the back. We'll winch the suspension back into position and then lash the winch to the front of the car. And they got to Kabul and maybe even to Bombay in that position. Yeah.
John Watson, you're waving a microphone at someone who's now got a question for us.
My history is not very good, but Rosemary Smith was obviously the star lady. But was Pat Moss with British Leyland BMC then, or had she gone to Ford? And does anyone know if she was kind of in with a chance of doing the event or not?
Well, I can answer that. Both Bill and I are supposed to be historians. She left BMC for Ford in 1963, so that she'd already left BMC several years before this event. In 68, she was rallying for Saab with her husband Eric Carlson, and they were not interested whatsoever in doing London-Sydney, so she never did it. Right, Bill?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Pat never did it because she was in the Saab team by then.
Yeah.
More questions? Otherwise, we're coming up to the witching hour. Paddy, have we got another? Hang on, have we got another?
Sorry,
mic?
can I just say, I forgot to say,
your mic's up.
Silverstone, okay. I just want to say that the good news is Silverstone, and nobody knows about it yet, really, we've got permission to put up 200-bedroom hotel. It's all been sealed with Hilton. So we're going to have 200-bedroom hotel at Silverstone, which will make us forget about the bad news of the motorcycle Grand Prix. And we've also got the Heritage Centre there. So Silverstone is flying, and that's had nothing to do with me. I'll take credit for it because it's on my watch, but it was all the good work was done by other people. And if I can just say, on the event last week when I was over in Northern Ireland for a charity, Macmillan charity event with Rosie. They've turned the drawing office of the Titanic into a hotel, very nice hotel. And we were being shown round it, and we were shown the radio room, which the signal came in SOS early in the morning saying Titanic is sinking. And of course, as you know, it was on its maiden voyage. It had picked up some people in Cork and then sank on the way to America. And some smart guy in the Belfast office said, well, it was all right when it left here. I took the Mini, my replica Mini, which has been on show in the Mini factory here in Oxford. I took it round to the front to get it photographed with the widow of the man who built it for me. And there was a wedding going on in the hotel, and this is a true story. And there was an old guy and his wife at the wedding, and they were looking at the car. And he said, is that the car? He said, that chap from Belfast, he said, won the Monte Carlo Paddy something, he said, back in '64. I didn't tell him it was a replica, and I said, yeah, that's it. He said, when did he die then?
Yeah, thank you, Graham and Rosie and Alec and Paddy and Bill and Hugh and Howard. It's really, you know, when we started doing these MGB Register Lectures back in whenever it was, so I suppose we've done about half a dozen now. We've had a couple of years of gaps in them, and we thought, well, what should we do? And then, of course, we've all, within the MGB Register, been tied up with this car that we bought, and then thought afterwards, have we done the right thing here? Because it was a bit of a drag. Talked to my wife, she's never sees me, and others who've been involved with it. But now it's happened, and we got it taxed at MOT on Friday, so now it's actually drivable. It's all been worthwhile. So we then decided, okay, we do this lecture, and I'd just like to thank you all for supporting us for doing it, because you never know when you put on an event, you make a date, you come to a place like this and look at the hall and say, right, okay, we'll sign a blank check, that it's going to happen, you know. I think we've up to about 180 people, if I remember rightly, sat here. So it's worked out well. I thank you all for attending on this foul day out there. Some of you actually, I believe, were handed over some money to Roger with the raffle tickets. I know it's very difficult getting by him, but some of you gave us some money for the raffle tickets, and I've got some numbers here.